Well, we've got a shocker for you today about Homeland Security. You will not believe what people are saying about that troubled agency. But first of all, if the Ebola outbreak spreads to major cities in Africa, it could lead to a, quote, unimaginable catastrophe. Well, that's the grim warning from the man who discovered the killer virus in 1976.
Some politicians say the United States should ban travel from countries infected by Ebola. And now a nurse in Spain has come down with the deadly disease. Caitlin Burke has the story.
This morning, doctors in Spain confirmed the first known case of Ebola spreading outside the outbreak zone. A nurse who helped treat infected missionaries who were flown home has tested positive for the disease. Spanish health officials say she's being treated in isolation, and they're working to keep it from spreading further.
We're getting a list of all of those who could possibly have been in contact with her. We'll be in touch with all of these people to see up to which point there could have been contagion.
Lawmakers are urging the White House to restrict travel from the West African countries affected by Ebola. But the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention argue that would only hurt efforts to stop the outbreak and put Americans at greater risk. Meanwhile, health officials here in the U.S. remain on high alert while 2 Ebola patients continue to receive treatment. In Dallas, Thomas Duncan remains in critical condition. In Nebraska, American journalist Ashoka Mukpo so far is showing only mild symptoms.
He sounds very strong, and I think he shares in the relief of the rest of his family that he's been able to come back for good medical treatment here.
President Obama says that ending the Ebola crisis is a top national security priority. And he says the U.S. is working on new protocols to do additional screenings of airline passengers arriving from West Africa. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Well, Liberia has been ground zero for this deadly outbreak of Ebola, and CBN News is now on the scene there. Wendy Griffith has that story from the CBN newsroom. Here's Wendy.
Thanks, Pat. More than 2,000 people have died from Ebola in Liberia. But as George Thomas reports, Operation Blessing is there with important medical supplies to help fight this horrifying disease.
The panic and anxiety are palpable. Across this poverty-stricken West African nation, Liberians are struggling to contain their fear. The few Ebola treatment centers that are open are overwhelmed and understaffed with the sick and dying. Dozens of victims are dying daily. CBN News arrived in the capital city, Monrovia, late Monday night. The moment we stepped off the plane, each passenger had to wash their hands with bleach. A few feet away, nurses stood armed with thermometers to check temperature. Lines of defense here against the, I'm doing well, thank you, ma'am, against Ebola is right here at the international airport in Monrovia. Each person is checked coming in and also out of the country. Thank you. Liberia has accounted for more than half of the world's deaths from the virus. Despite promises from the government here that the situation is under control, people on the streets aren't buying it. Folks are afraid of one another. There's no touching, no hugging, no pats on the back. Basically, people are keeping at least a full arm's length apart from each other. Operation Blessing has been on the ground helping. This week, the group will set up an additional 6 chlorine generators capable of producing hundreds of gallons of chlorine a day, allowing thousands to wash their hands thoroughly in chlorine water and then with soap to stop the virus. 10 more units are being dispatched. Some 100 chlorinated hand washing stations will also be delivered to affected villages far from the capital city. A 40-foot shipping container full of critical supplies like gloves, masks, and bed linens will make their way to Ebola treatment centers. Meanwhile, the daily urgency to get the word out about prevention continues. Teams of volunteers are holding awareness seminars across the country to make sure folks follow critical hygiene steps to keep from getting the virus. I'll continue to bring you the very latest on Operation Blessing's outreach, plus daily behind-the-scenes reports on life in the Ebola zone. Please join me for that and much more on CBNnews.com, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm George Thomas, CBN News, reporting from Monrovia, Liberia.
Thanks, George. We are praying for you and all the people there in Liberia. Pat?
Well, Wendy, I'd be very happy if George wasn't there, to tell you the truth, because he's a very valuable member of our staff. But we want to show the people what's going on. And, you know, I've been involved in Liberia for some years, and we've seen some great things happening there. But what's happening right now is just a terrible tragedy. Wendy?
Yes, it is. Well, in other news, the Supreme Court opened the door Monday for same-sex marriage in several more states and possibly the eventual legalization of it across America. Voters in 5 states had approved measures banning gay marriage, but courts threw them out, and the Supreme Court let those rulings stand, making same-sex marriage legal in those states. It could be legal in up to 30 states soon, but supporters of traditional marriage say they'll keep fighting. Pat, what do you think?
Well, I think once again the courts have muddled the waters. You don't know. The Supreme Court has punted instead of taking a clear stand. There are a number of circuit courts that picked up on some verbiage that took place in another Supreme Court decision, and they are ruling, overriding the wishes of the states. State after state after state, the voters overwhelmingly voted to protect traditional marriage. Here in the state of Virginia, for example, there was an election. The man running as a Democrat for Attorney General said, I will support the laws that are on the books. That included the Defense of Marriage Act that was on the books here in Virginia by a referendum. The minute he was in office, he turned against it and did everything he could to undermine it. Now he's saying what a great day it is for Virginia that the homosexuals are getting married. The people didn't like that. But, you know, it's the same thing with abortion. Instead of letting the people decide, as they should have under the Constitution, it was taken out of their hands by a Supreme Court decision, Roe versus Wade. And because of that, no effort by the people has been successful ever since. And it's been a tragedy, as we've seen over 50 million unborn babies slaughtered in this land. Wendy?
Pat, it was created to make America more secure, but critics say the Department of Homeland Security is just another bloated bureaucratic mess. Paul Strand brings us this look at why some people say the massive organization could actually make America less safe.
9/11 was such a major catastrophe, it certainly seemed to call for making massive sweeping changes among the bureaucracies that failed to stop al-Qaeda that dark day. So the government went to work to put together a solution to prevent such a major terrorist attack from happening again. But some critics feel that when President Bush and Congress created the Department of Homeland Security, they simply came up with an overarching, monstrously unwieldy super bureaucracy that may have been exactly the wrong solution. CIA-trained retired Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer works in the nuts and bolts of intelligence and analysis. He says the new department wasn't necessary.
All those organizations were essentially functioning very well where they were sat. So this is one of those situations where the government fixed something that was not broken.
Fearing that many of the departments and agencies that have to do with guarding the nation weren't working closely together enough, the Bush administration decided to force a total of 22 agencies into one giant new department called Homeland Security. Steve Bucci, now with the Heritage Foundation, worked for years as a Pentagon representative to Homeland Security.
Frankly, it was slapped together quickly, a ton of different organizations.
And Bucci says often a high-up official at Homeland Security doesn't really have the power he or she needs to issue orders to these agencies who were all shoved together.
He has to sort of cajole them into doing things rather than direct them.
Shaffer says there were serious personnel problems from the start.
Many of the organizations which donated people to DHS wanted to basically use it as a dumping ground to get rid of people who they thought were not the best performers. So when you take that as the baseline, it all goes downhill from there.
And both Shaffer and Bucci worry DHS is way too big and made up of parts that will just never fit together well. Imagine one department trying to oversee so many different agencies with nearly 250,000 employees. U.S. Customs and Border Protection alone has more than 60,000. The U.S. Coast Guard nearly that many. The Immigration Services and FEMA add another 60,000 or so. The Secret Service's 6,000 get shoehorned in there. And then finally there's the agency so many Americans love to hate, the TSA, with more than 55,000 workers.
Just the size of it and the way it was put together from so many different parts have left a lot of overlap in some areas and gaps in others. They're still sorting that out, which at this point, so many years later, you would think they would have that worked out, but they don't.
Schaefer says it has so many functions, it's difficult to figure out its actual mission.
Yogi Berra once said, if you don't know where you're going, it's going to be hard to get there. And so this is very much the case for DHS.
And the major problem it was formed to solve still goes on. Agencies not sharing intelligence.
Some of it is the old information is power. And if we have it and we're working this issue, we don't necessarily want to share it with those other guys because then they might get the credit.
Schaefer says insiders tell him this.
Sharing of information and data today is worse than before 9/11.
Making it all even harder, a crushing amount of congressional oversight.
Those 22 agencies which were put into one now still have to report to over 100 different congressional committees for their oversight. It's really hard to get good when you have that many people looking over your shoulder and telling you what to do.
And inside, Bucci says there's a toxic culture from employees knowing that Homeland Security is rated the worst place in the government to work.
They're told DHS is the biggest, most bureaucratic organization ever. They're told DHS is inefficient. It's really hard to keep your morale up when you hear that, and when you are trying to do a good job, but you keep bouncing off of this wall of bureaucracy.
So should Homeland Security simply be dismantled? Bucci votes no.
It may not be perfect. Backing up now and starting over again, I think would probably leave us less safe than what we have now.
Schaefer disagrees. He says the department should be done away with because it's not only dysfunctional, it's actually harmful to its primary mission, the security of America.
You see an organization which actually I think is counterproductive to the point it gets in the way of other organizations trying to get their job done.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Paul. Pat, if Homeland's not sharing information, how can that make us safer?
Well, it doesn't, Wendy. This, you know, you like to criticize, I'm sure people like to criticize the Democrats. Isn't Obama terrible? But this is a George Bush thing. I don't know if he picked this up at Harvard Business School or where he got it, but it's an absolute nightmare. It should never have been done. It was a bureaucratic blunder from the start. And my vote is to break it up. You can't have oversight by 100 congressional committees. You cannot have a couple 100,000 employees doing disparate functions with no central purpose. And I experienced FEMA firsthand down in New Orleans. It was an absolute disaster. Absolute disaster. Instead of helping, they stood in the way. For example, people in New Orleans during the height of Katrina were starving, desperate for water, desperate for help. We had trucks, Operation Blessing had trucks on the causeway just outside the city waiting to get in with all the supplies or with the supplies those people were looking for. Could they get in? No. Why not? Because FEMA kept them out. Because FEMA didn't quite have the right mix of bringing stuff in. And you find people in New Orleans trying to do something, and every time FEMA would stand in their way, and then suddenly they're spending an unconscionable amount of money. And you look at fields and fields and fields of these house trailers that nobody were using. It was a nightmare, and that is typical. Now we've got to mess with what used to be in the Treasury Department, the Secret Service, which is a highly specialized and highly skilled organization that has gone all to pieces. The director just resigned because of breaches of security at the White House that were just nothing short of shocking. My vote, break that monstrosity up and do it quickly and get it back to where it should be so that each organization has a discrete function and it knows what to do. And
can be accountable.
Accountable.
I mean, how can you be accountable in something that ginormous?
You look at that TSA, as I said, one Jamaican who was driving a car at an airport, he said it stands for thousands standing around. TSA, thousands standing. But to think that it became a dumping ground for the less capable employees of various agencies, it's a shocking thing. But it's time Congress get hold of that monstrosity and break it up. Then we'll have some efficiency. But it's not making us safer, it's making us less safe. All right.
The second blood moon lunar eclipse of the year will take place Wednesday. People in North America will be able to see it early Wednesday morning if skies are clear. The moon will appear orange or red because of the sunlight in the atmosphere. That's why it's called a blood moon. And you can find Eric Stakelbeck's amazing story on the implications of blood moons for Israel on cbnnews.com. The Seattle City Council is replacing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day in the city. The resolution passed unanimously Monday. It celebrates the contributions and culture of Native Americans. Some Italian Americans objected, with one saying they had no problem honoring Indigenous peoples, but added America wouldn't be America without Christopher Columbus. And you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.